Welcome to another NCIXPC episode of NCIX Tech Tips. This week, we've got the AR-72M, and you might have noticed something a little bit different about this AMD Radeon Performance Class system, and that is that it uses an XFX case. This is the Type 1 Bravo, and I think the best thing about it is that it sets itself up really well for an encore. Okay, no, really, the name of the case is not necessarily the best thing about it. Let's go through some of the actual features before we dive into the inside of this system. So the concept here is delivering airflow to the places that need it most, and then kind of going back to like a kicking it old school styling, like an older style performance PC, aggressive appearance. And actually, I think it has worked surprisingly well. In pictures, I kind of looked at the XFX cases and I was like, okay, maybe. You know what, in person, particularly this little red accent down here, and then the fact that the NCIX team has added some subtle glow TM lighting effects to it as well, like this little red light at the front, actually works really, really well. So tour of the case. The entire front of the case is like a corrugated sort of appearing plastic, with the bottom being full of vents and the top being full of stealthed optical drives. So yes, this system does include an optical drive, but mostly for the purpose of being able to show off that stealthed optical drive mechanism. The bottom has a nice little XFX logo, but for whatever reason the plastic is still on. Don't worry, we'll take care of that, as well as your power and reset switches. I like to see the power and reset switches on the front, even though the I/O is on the top, for one reason, and that is because top-mounted power switches can often be triggered by enthusiastic cats. We've got a microphone and headphone jack on the top, 2 USB 3 super speed ports, 2 regular USB 2 ports, and that's pretty much it for front I/O, but that's all that most people will need. On the right-hand side, we find that it is actually quite symmetrical. So the right and the left look pretty much the same, with this ventilated sort of structure, which actually makes sense here, because even though there are no fans, what this does is it gives a little bit of extra passive airflow to the back of the CPU socket as well as the back of the PCI slots, and then another sort of red XFX looking accent with the case branding on it. On the left-hand side, we find more ventilation, and this one is full of fan mounts. So there are actually 3 120 millimeter fans mounted down the entire side here, delivering fresh air to the CPU socket area as well as to the graphics card area. Turning the case all the way around, our I/O is provided by an ASRock motherboard, 2 PS2 ports, optical and coaxial audio out, 4 USB 2.0 ports, gigabit Ethernet, eSATA, 2 USB 3.0 ports, 7.1 audio out, and a very high-end graphics card in here. We are going to be finding an R9 290 on the inside, spoiler alert. And then finally, a couple of cable management or water cooling grommet sets, and then either a 120 or 140 millimeter fan mount in the back, but that is equipped with a 140 millimeter fan. Before we jump inside, there's a couple things I missed on the outside. So number 1 is that nice large removable fan filter that slides in from the back, nice and gently, just like that. And the other one is that there actually is an exhaust fan on the top. There's a single 120 millimeter fan on the top to help, there's a little bit of natural convection that's going to occur there just because heat kind of rises. But to help that, it's got like a little chimney. So on the side panel here, you can see that we've got those 3 120 millimeter BitPhoenix Spectre fans that I had talked about before. These are all plugged in. Oh, okay, I gotta be a little bit careful with it because there's just enough slack on the wires that you can get it off and you can kind of lay it down to work on something. But other than that, you'd want to unplug them, so they're all plugged into a splitter down here in the bottom of the system. And there are a couple cool things I want to point out about the inside of the case before we actually get into the components here. So it's got toolless 5 1/4 inch bays. It's also got 8 3.5 inch hard drive cages here that are also compatible. I actually pulled one of these off on the last take there because, I can't do everything in one take there. So these are able to mount 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch drives, but this is actually cool. So the top 5, you can take the cage out entirely, but this is a feature we've seen before, and the benefit would be that that front 200 millimeter intake fan can just, push all the air that it wants at the graphics cards, but they've got something that is a little bit different. You can actually use these included 2.5 inch drive sleds and move this in 1 inch. So if you don't need the entire front of the case here for a super long graphics card that doesn't even exist, and you just need another inch, you can do that. I think that's absolutely fantastic. So let's go ahead and do hardware specs now. Oh yeah, cable management holes are in the traditional XFX styling with kind of a little squiggly line, so you only use as much of it as you absolutely need to. It actually looks quite sharp. And then let's get into the specs here. So we have an AMD FX 8350 processor, so that's an 8-core. That's about as good as it gets on the AMD side. Then for the graphics card, we've got a Radeon R9 290 double dissipation, or double D. I see what you did there, XFX. You were indicating that you had 2 fans on it. That's what you meant by double D. Of course that is. It's got a gorgeous matte black PCB, actually a very, very nice ID overall, and then an illuminated XFX logo on the back that's going to look pretty striking if you're ever looking at your system from here. It's just one of those things. There's nothing the graphics card guys can do about it. They look, great from the angle where you never see them from. That's okay. We've got 8 gigs of AMD Radeon 1866 memory in the system, and then all of that is installed on an ASRock 970 Extreme 3 board. This board is a fairly basic motherboard, but it is good enough to power all these components. It's actually crossfire ready as well, and includes some features that you don't normally see on, well, more value-oriented boards like network prioritization and digital VRM. Speaking of digital VRM, the NCIX system team has gone with a Noctua C12P downward draft cooler. And the reason for that is because it's going to cooperate extremely well with those intake fans on the side, and because even though tower heat pipe coolers can perform a little bit better in terms of CPU temps, on a board like this where there isn't a ton of cooling on the VRM of the board and you're putting a high-powered 8-core CPU in there, having that extra downward airflow is going to help keep the motherboard cooler as well. So I think that was a fantastic choice here. For storage, the team has gone with a 2TB Seagate SSHD. So remember guys, SSHDs have a hard drive with a very small SSD that intelligently caches your most frequently used data. So rather than having a dedicated SSD and a dedicated hard drive, which will cost more, they went with one of those. But of course, you can change that out, and there are lots of other things you can change as well, so you don't have a choice of OS forced on you. When you add the system to the card, it will reveal special system-only operating system pricing. So if you want to install Windows 8.1, then that's great. If you want the system with no OS and you want to install, SteamOS or Linux or something else on your own, then that's fine too. Finally, we've got the power plant. This is an XFX 750-watt power supply. This is their core edition, and it features 80+ bronze efficiency to go along with its XFX when they first launched their power supplies, we were like, whoa, XFX's power supply styling is so far out there. Well, now that's become sort of the traditional XFX look, that edgy but not over-the-top kind of styling that they've got going on here. So it's a solid power supply, actually. XFX power supplies do come recommended from yours truly, as well as the NCIX Systems team. As always, it's extras time, so with the system you get 1 Radeon Rewards Gold tier reward and 1 Radeon Rewards Bronze tier reward, which is a total of 4 games, and with your gold one, you can actually pick up the new Thief with your system free of charge. You also get this sweet Battlefield 4 dog tag with like a Radeon is Gaming thing, and you could wear it. It doesn't go over my head. I'd have to unlatch it in order to put it on, but you could unlatch it, you could put it on, and then you would be able to wear these awesome dog tags. Now, why would I bring up Battlefield 4? Great question, because this system is actually optimized in a very real way for Battlefield 4. Really not much money has been spent on something that isn't a highly threaded CPU and a very powerful Mantle-ready graphics card, because the Mantle driver and the Mantle patch are now available for Battlefield 4, and the NCIXPC team has tested about a 20% difference in performance in Battlefield 4 with this configuration using Mantle versus DirectX. So while some of the components in this system are a little bit lower tier than you would expect to find in a computer that has an R9 290, a very expensive, very powerful graphics card, it's because no money was wasted. This is all about Mantle performance, and that's why the 8-core CPU as well, because Mantle, in addition, really more so than providing better graphics card performance, optimizes a game to run really well with your CPU, especially if you have a multi-core CPU. So the system comes in at $14.99, but there is an important note, guys. Due to currency exchange rate fluctuations, the pricing may actually change a little bit, so check the link in the description for the most current pricing. It's kind of something that we up in here in Canada kind of just have to deal with. You know, whatever anyone else's currency does, so vary our prices, and that's just how it is. Thank you for checking out this week's episode of our NCIX Tech Tips NCIXPC series. Don't forget to subscribe to NCIX Tech Tips for more videos like this from NCIX.com. 10 points if you can say, without rewinding, how many times I've said NCIX in the last 30 seconds.